Let's go.
You're listening to Making Data Simple, where we make the world of data effortless, relevant, and yes, even fun.
Podcast listeners, thank you for returning once again. We appreciate you. I can't believe how many people listen to this on a regular basis. So thank you so much. I've got a great guest today. You know, that's how it goes here. Today's guest is Craig McLuckie. He's the co-creator. This is going to take a little bit to introduce. I mean, Craig's so popular here. He's the co-creator of Kubernetes. He's a co-founder of the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, and now the founder and CEO of Stacklok. That's where he's been building tools to help AI agents safely connect with enterprise systems. He spent his career at the intersection of infrastructure, security, and open source, with leadership stints at Google, Microsoft, VMware. Look, Craig, I'll stop there. I could keep going. I want you to introduce yourself, but welcome to the podcast first and foremost.
Thanks for having me on, Al. Yeah, it's great to have an opportunity to chat, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation.
Look, we try to keep it informal here. So like I said, I always say it's like just being at the bar, asking questions that people want to know about, maybe are too afraid to ask. But before we begin, please give us, I gave you the intro there, but what's your intro? How would you describe yourself? What's your brand? Where'd you start, and how'd you get here?
Yeah, I like to think of myself as an engineer, but I like to build with people and teams and larger things. Like I think that one of the joys in life as an engineer is you build something and you watch it create value in the world. And so I self-identify as someone who's an engineer, but not someone who works with their hands as much as they used to. My career has been kind of a really fun journey. I think I kind of grew up in South Africa and had an opportunity to join Microsoft back when it was cool to work at Microsoft, and it's cool again, but there was a little period there where it was a little bumpy. But I think the big break for me happened when I had a chance to go work at Google, where I met this guy, Joe Beda, and we started playing with running virtualized workloads on Google's infrastructure as a way to start, bringing that capability to Google, mostly for IT purposes was the initial intent. But we had this crazy idea to turn that into a cloud offering. And that eventually became Google Compute Engine and was sort of the anchor for Google's cloud products, which was super fun. And, as anyone who's built a business knows, there's obviously a lot of different sides to building a business. Building great technology is one side of it, but you also need to be able to sell the technology. And, Google wasn't really an enterprise selling machine at the time. And so we had this kind of harebrained scheme to build a technology that was really inspired by a lot of what Google had, built internally, but that we could then use to push the frontier of infrastructure technology forwards. And that became Kubernetes, which was a pretty popular project. A lot of people are using it. I'm pretty happy with the way it worked out. There was an obvious kind of gap in the ecosystem around open source. And, we looked at the ecosystem, and it was pretty clear that we needed a foundation to kind of home the technology and to create an innovative domain where other people could bring technologies and this whole ecosystem of open source projects could emerge. And so I worked with Jim Zemlin at Linux Foundation, and we came up with the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, which was also a very fun project. Did a bunch of other things, built a company, sold it, got the startup itch again, and I'm back at it with this new company, Stacklok.
Dude, I think you have an amazing. You're even subtly not talking about how amazing your history is here. I went through it. It looks like you left Google and then came back to Google. Is that true? You went to Microsoft in between and then said, "No, I got to go back," or what?
Yeah, it was one of those moments where I think there were two factors at play. Like Microsoft trained you back in the days to leave and come back at higher levels. It was the best way to get promoted. And I kind of loved working at Microsoft, even though it wasn't ideal. But, it was difficult to get Compute Engine off the ground. And there were a lot of kind of objections, which I sort of won posthumously. And so I was then sort of asked to return to kind of lead the computing strategy once Google had kind of committed to actually going into the cloud space. And it was a great signal for me to kind of continue my journey there. And I'm really grateful they gave me that opportunity, because otherwise I would not have had a chance to build Kubernetes.
I guess I should restate. You went to Microsoft, then went to Google, then went back to Microsoft, then went back to Google, I should say. So You've been a little, absence must make the heart grow fonder. As soon as you leave, they say, hey, why are you leaving? And then they try to get you back. Is that how it works, or what?
It was a little bit of that. It was also a little bit of, I saw Microsoft had been very good to me. They taught me early on in my career that the best way to get promoted at Microsoft was to leave and come back after doing something in the industry, because you could bring new skills and perspective. They were always welcoming you back. And, of the 7 promotions I got at Microsoft, I got 5 by doing exactly that, leaving for a short tenure and returning to the company. But in the case of this, I learned I love Google. It's a fantastic place to work. And it was just a wonderful opportunity. And so, when I had the opportunity to come back and kind of lead the strategy for Google's kind of sort of foray into the cloud computing domain. It just was too good an opportunity to pass up.
Sounds like if it comes down to it, culture of Google matches your style a little bit better than Microsoft. Is that true?
I would say so. I always kind of joke that a company is almost a caricature of the founders, right? Microsoft was sort of the alpha geek persona, certainly during the Balmer years, though under Satya, it's become a very different company. Google had this kind of wonderful passive-aggressive attitude where if they didn't like what you're saying, they'd ignore you and just hope you'd go away. And I think what I discovered at Google, and I don't know how the company is now, I haven't worked there for years, but it was a wonderful place. I had really good sponsorship from people like Urs Holsley and some other kind of really interesting leaders. But the thing with them was that if you were generally right and you just didn't give up, you could eventually have your way. And so, I think we kind of proved that we were sort of generally right with Compute Engine, that it was an important anchor for Google's sort of transition into the cloud domain, and that it was a strategically important part. And then, we eventually proved that we were mostly right about this idea of building an open source framework that would more natively mirror the way that Google ran its internal systems. And we managed to actually accomplish some pretty impressive things with people thought at the time were pretty crazy.
Look, I'm going to call you out. You undersell your first startup. It looks like it was a massive success. Let's be honest. I mean, you tell me, and you got to tell me about Heptio. I'm not as familiar with that, to be honest, but I think if my records are correct, you sell for like $550 million to VMware, something like that. So by all accounts, it sounds like it's super successful.
Yeah, it was a fun journey, right? And I think, for me, the moment, my friend Joe had retired, and like I love working with Joe. He's a fantastic engineer. Kind of, I think of him as sort of top 10 of his generation engineer. Just one of these really intensely intelligent and intuitive human beings that's able to kind of create beautiful things. And he had kind of retired. Google had been very kind to him, but he was getting bored, and he was kind of badgering me every other day about like, hey, we should maybe do a startup. I'm thinking about startups. And I remember just kind of, I recently, sponsored the acquisition of this company, Apogee. I was kind of working on this harebrained scheme to kind of bring in an API gateway company, which I thought was a great asset because it came with a really good go-to-market apparatus. It had some really strong customer kind of connections that we could then purvey into a broader story. And then I wanted to kind of tie it off with the technology that became Istio. And, it was what I was kind of chewing on at the time. And I met the CEO of the company, Chet Kapoor, and he basically said to me, like, don't do a startup, like it's a 10-year journey. That's the ordeal. But if you're going to do a startup, do it at a moment when there's this incredible disruption sweeping through the industry and you're reasonably confident that the incumbents just cannot change quickly enough to absorb it. And so I looked at the calculus of like, hey, Kubernetes is happening. This technology is significant. It's going to become a significant part of most enterprise organizations' kind of IT landscape. I saw this gap where a lot of the bigger organizations wanted to leverage the technology as a way to achieve independence from some of the kind of monolithic vendors. And I just knew the timing was perfect. So I kind of walked downstairs, picked up my phone, called a VC friend of mine, was like, hey, will you spot me a seed round? He's like, no, just go straight to Series A, get going. And we did. And it was a fun journey. Like I really appreciated the opportunity because we were just sitting with the tailwinds of Kubernetes, in our sales. We generated revenue pretty quickly. I think the thing that shook the industry is we won a very big account with one of the major tier one banks that everyone was trying to secure at the time. And that kind of shook the industry a little bit. And then Pat Gelsinger came to me and he was like, hey, basically I like the cut of your jib, join VMware and kind of be a part of building out this new franchise where VMware kind of makes a foray into the cloud ecosystem on the back of cloud native technologies. And I thought he was kind of crazy, but I really liked him. And I was like, yeah, that sounds reasonable. He's like, okay, well, we'll belly bump on price, but you'll join the team. And that was pretty much it. We belly bumped on price and I joined the team. And frankly, I really enjoyed it. I think a lot of founders tell the story of like this wandering in the wilderness post-acquisition, the agony of earnout. But VMware was very different for me. I really felt connected to the mission. I loved the culture of the company. I thought Pat Gelsinger was just a hell of a charismatic, capable leader. And Raghu, who succeeded him, was someone that I held in very high regard as just one of the best technologists I've ever interacted with. But it was also just a masterclass in running an organization at scale. It was a well-run organization that was delivering value to enterprises at scale. And I felt that, no matter where my career took me, that opportunity was just unparalleled. So I was very happy to be a part of the VMware machine. And then obviously the Broadcom acquisition came along. And, I am probably not the right person to work at Broadcom. Like, is at the end of the day, like I really respect and admire, how they work and create value, but it's not necessarily how I tend to work and create value. And so that created this moment where it was probably sensible for me to think about doing something else, and that's what brought us to Stacklok.
Man, awesome story. Did that acquisition ultimately form the basis of Tanzu? Is that where that came out?
Yeah, Tanzu was the evolution of that acquisition. So I ran the R&D organization and took my little 110 person company. Eventually, had about a 1,500 person engineering organization rolling up to me, and the scope of my attention was Tanzu.
To your point, Broadcom, they run things a little bit differently, but I mean, they make money. There's no doubt about it.
Oh,
they make money.
I mean, it's impressive. I think that the subtext here is like, I was scared I was just going to get fired. At the end of the day, and I don't think my ego could have taken that, because it is a very operationally focused organization, and I'm not necessarily quite as operationally dialed in as a lot of the leaders that really succeed in that environment. And so it wasn't just a question of like, is this what I want to do? It was also a question of, will I fit here? If I'm being completely honest with you.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. I could see that. I mean, they get that reputation for like pushing up their prices and their margins and that kind of stuff at the cost sometimes of clients. But like I say, the market likes them.
Yeah, no, and look, you may not like them, but you kind of have to respect them. And honestly, I don't think it's as monochromatic as that. I've spoken to a lot of people that really enjoy working with Broadcom. They do get shit done. And so enough said about that.
All right, so then now you're running Stacklok. So what keeps pulling you back to these big infrastructure level type of problems? Tell me about Stacklok. What problems are you trying to solve? Where do you sit today?
Yeah, so it's interesting. This is a kind of classic story of a startup. I think every startup is different, and it's kind of like, I always joke about this to my friends, where it's like your children, right? Like, you have your first child and they sleep through the night, and they learn to read when they're 3, and they eat everything, and they just listen to you, and you're like, I'm a great parent. Like, I don't know what everyone's complaining about.
I know where this is going.
Parenting so easy. And then you have your second child, and it's very different, right? And I think it's always different. And Heptio was a very short run for me. It was only 2 years, and I think that is a big part of the story, which is I didn't get to see a lot of the journey. I didn't get to see the complexities of scaling. We stepped off that train relatively early in the journey, and I wanted to ride the train longer. Is a part of it. I think part of the problem with that sort of second parent mindset is a little bit of hubris, right? Like, I encountered a problem during my tenure at VMware that kind of was one of these kind of get stuck in your mind problems. I think the thing with me is I need to be captivated by what I'm working on. I need to obsess about it. I need to dream about it. The problem needs to be in a domain where I can, close enough to the work that I've done in the past that lets me kind of go after it. But it needs to be a big problem for humanity. And the problem that I saw that was kind of essential was this idea that 80% of the world's software was written by random people on the internet. Open source software is effectively written by random people on the internet. And in a world which was getting darker, in a world where nation state actors were starting to kind of look at the supply chain of software with interest, it felt like there was this kind of problem, which is, how do you get your arms around the software that represents, everything that you're running in your data center? And so we started building a set of technologies around that. I raised my Series A, raised my Series B, and then I made the mistake of going on vacation, which is always dangerous. My wife and I, we usually we like active vacations, and I was kind of lazy in my vacation booking, and we ended up at one of these resorts that was lovely, but there wasn't a lot to do. It's all you can eat, all you can drink, people sitting around the pool drinking margaritas and getting hammered. And by day 2, I'd had about as many margaritas.
Sounds like a good time to me.
The first 2 days. But by day 3, I was just losing my mind. And so I started thinking, which is always dangerous. And there were really 2 things that were evident to me. One was I was starting to understand the cost of our sales. What it looked like to actually get the system deployed into enterprise organizations, the people, not just using it in a light way, but using it in anger as a core part of the platform. And there was a lot of work associated with that, and particularly a multi-party sale where you have to kind of capture the imagination of the CISO, but then you're contingent on these platform teams to adopt the technology it just seemed more complex. Now, that doesn't preclude you from being able to build a great successful company or solve these problems, but it was just an eye-opener for me. But the thing that really kind of shook me to my core was this recognition that I'd kind of been discounting AI in my own mind, up till
really?
Not when I say discounting it as in, I thought it was a really powerful tool, but I assumed that it would achieve asymptotic convergence on a capability that would be useful in a lot of domains, but wouldn't be quite as disruptive as it's obviously proving to be. And I think, that vacation for me was this moment where I realized that I was selling into a segment that was about to be massively disrupted by AI. Like, it just wasn't obvious that the consumption patterns for software and open source software was going to hold when you have these systems, not the systems we have today, but the systems we'll have in 3 to 5 years when the business is really starting to shine. And so it caused me to kind of, take a moment to step back and really think about what we were doing. And, I was like, okay, I need to pivot. What I've built is of a certain, kind of nature. And I was really faced with two options at that point. I could try to AI wash what I'd built, which I think a lot of startups do, which is like, I've got this thing and now it's the same thing with AI, right? Or I could take a step back and basically burn the boats and reconsolidate, re-educate the team, restructure the organization, redefine the culture, and go after a problem that spoke to me as much as the supply chain problem did, but that was obvious and right in front of me that I could really get my arms around. And the thing that drew my attention, and it took a while to get there, we ran a bunch of experiments, we put out some open source projects, we played with ideas. But the thing that captured my imagination was this boundary that has to exist between the world of stochastic systems and the hard, cruel, uncaring world of distributed systems that I'd grown up in, right? And MCP as a protocol had kind of just dropped. And I looked at it and I saw two things that I thought were really kind of critical. There was the obvious thing, which was, hey, this is the path towards people building AI native applications, right? Like where you start to describe your tools, your resources, et cetera, in a way that can be consumed by these models. And over time, the consumption model for enterprise technology shifts, where AI effectively, if you follow the kind of MVC, MVP, MVVM kind of arc, the model becomes the view model and presentation layer for a modern application. I was like, wow, that's really cool. But it also represented something which I think was undervalued and remains undervalued, which is it's a protocol. It's a relatively simple protocol that sits between your existing systems and these AI systems, these stochastic systems. And because you've got a kind of well-structured protocol, you now have a well-structured control point. And that to me was just extremely interesting and compelling. And I was like, wow, every enterprise is going to need this. The people start to get their heads around the system. But if we start executing now and we execute really well, we will be in a position where we can, bring to market something that has a completeness to it and a compatibility with the way that enterprises operate that I don't think other people will be able to do. And so that's been the journey that we've been on, is really starting to help larger organizations that can't just NPX run random packages from the internet, on behalf of agents on developers' desktops, or start to actually get their arms around it and create that kind of that controlled interface between these systems. And that's been extremely fun.
Let me make sure I understand this. I mean, are you saying you started Stacklok and then pivoted? I mean, like, in other words, you started it, go on vacation, and you go, we're heading down the wrong path. But you were doing well already. You made good money to start with.
Yeah, I was doing well. I mean, we just raised our Series B. We were doing well. Everything was looking good. But that's no excuse to get complacent. And it was interesting because I talked to my board about this, and it was funny because I expected them to freak out at me. I was like, I was kind of scared that they would be just like, yeah, just give us our money back. You're done. But they were like, it's really funny because we work with a lot of founders, and usually we have to go to them and explain to them how screwed they are. They don't usually come to us and explain to us.
They took it and they were good, huh? They said, bring it on?
They said, go for it. They were like, they were very, very supportive. They were excited and supportive. And I thought that was wonderful.
That's amazing. Sounds like you got a good board.
Yeah, it's also a nod to the pedigree of the board. These are very, very high quality people, and they play the long game. And I really appreciated their support through that process, because I mean, it was obviously a terrifying moment, right? Like you never know what you're going to get. And like, I don't like failing. Like, I tried it once, it really sucked. I don't ever want to do that again.
Could you repeat again? I mean, where did you start? I mean, so what was the direction of the company, just very quickly, in terms of the mission?
Yeah, software supply chain management. So basically, hey, here's I built two things. One is a system that generated very high quality signal about the provenance of open source packages. And then a second system which enabled you to start establishing controls at a variety of control points across the SDLC, so that when something flipped red, you could run an update cycle to kind of make sure that these things were updated, and you could start to assert policy across your SDLC based on your organization's needs. So you could say, like instead of having something, hey, one of these scans just failed in a production rollout because there's bad packages. It's like, well, which repo do we have to file an issue to get a rebuild of this package? Which vendor do we need to tickle to actually get it updated? And can we kind of start to create this self-annealing system to support that? That was the founding kind of thesis.
and you go to the board and you say, "Yeah, we're not doing that anymore," or we're going to continue that, or we're gonna like pivot over time and do a transition, and now we're going to do what?
And it's like I said, I don't know.
You said what?
I said I didn't know. I was like,
well, now I think the board could have a problem.
Well, no, but I mean, I basically said, look, let me kind of lay out my assets here. I've got this technology. We can kind of figure out ways to add a third leg to the stool. We can AI wash it. I can take the engineers I have. They're really great platform engineers. I actually think it's a huge asset. I would just straight up, if I was starting a company right now and you gave me the amount of money you gave me and I could just pay this amount of money for the team, I'd buy it. It's just a great team, great culture, great people. It's fantastic. But I need time. Like I was well capitalized. I need time to effectively retool the team. I need time for the team to learn. Like they need to reimagine themselves as for this domain. I'm going to have to retool the organization because what I'm going to be building is going to be kind of generating value in the AI engineering space, and I need space, like 6 months to figure out And so I went to the board. Obviously presented you don't go to the board and say I don't know what I'm going to do. You go and say, this is what I'm doing. These are the 3 experiments I'm going to run. This is where I think I can create value. This is the learnings I expect to get. And then this is what I'm going to do with that data. And, it took a couple of turns of the crank before I really converged on what I'm building right now with Stacklok. But it's paid dividends. I mean, we're way better off today than we were a year ago when I kind of pivoted the company.
Well, they say most startups start with a dartboard on the wall, and you throw a dart, and then you move the dartboard to where the dart is. It sounds like you is the definition of that analogy.
I would say so in a way, but it's also, it's important not to success is a crappy teacher. It's not a good teacher, right? Like you succeed enough.
Yeah, but it's more enjoyable sometimes. I don't know.
It's definitely more enjoyable, right? But it creates hubris. Right, like you think that the way that you approach things historically just naturally apply, right? And I think that the experience that I had with the last startup was very different to the experience of the new startup because this one I was building up from the ground up. I didn't have the cachet and the swagger of having kind of founded something like Kubernetes and then just jumped into a startup in it. So there was a lot of kind of relearning and repatterning that needed to happen. And but at the same time, like a startup is nothing if not a learning machine. And I think to be fair, it wasn't unusual, right? Like AI was. If AI hadn't been there, I would have been very happy with where we were. If I couldn't map a way where I was like, the way people build software in 5 years will be profoundly different. And, this is my justification for believing that the way people will produce software in 5 years will be profoundly different. And I don't think that what we're doing, building this kind of very complex, very expensive system is going to create more fragility and brittleness in these environments that are going through huge disruption. This is not an area that people are going to want to invest in. And I think the board quickly acknowledged that and recognized that was true. And then it's just a question of what you're going to do now.
The interesting thing on that, so I got a question on AI, and then I'm going to get back. I want to get back to your company because I want to talk to you real quick about AI. I'm with you on that. I had to do a presentation, a keynote at an event like last week, and I'm sitting there. The gentleman next to me was talking about his career or something, and I was kind of joking with him, and I said, "Let me show you something." Because he goes, "Well, what do you got?" And we've got our own code assistant here at IBM. I said, "Well, give me something to create." And he said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Just give me something." And he goes, "Well, I would like an application while we're at this event that'll record all the customer names that we meet, blah, blah, blah." I said, "Perfect." So I just typed this thing in. I said, blah, blah, blah. And in 30 seconds, boom, I got this application. It's almost intuitive. It almost like predicts your mind. It has like customer cards and all this stuff where you can enter the customer, and he's just blown away. The reason I give you that little story is, where do you think this is going for the developer real quick? Because you said it's going to transform. You said the next 5 years. I got to stop you there for a second. I want your opinion.
No, I think everything changes, but I think it does fundamentally change the unit economics of work in a lot of different ways. But I don't think it displaces people in totality. At the end of the day, you have to have an accountable party, and a person can only be accountable based on the breadth of their awareness, right? And so, people talk a lot about technical debt. I think what AI is creating is cognitive debt, right? Like, you're ultimately, an analogy I like to use with my team is like, hey, these things are like dogs, right? Like you love your dog is incredibly useful, but if your dog bites someone at a dog park, you're responsible. Like, you are accountable, right? It's like you don't get to blame the dog. Like you are ultimately the owner of this thing. And so, when I think about the changes that we're going to see, like at the end of the day, we cannot hold an agent accountable for work product, and we cannot hold an agent accountable for its behavior. So it's not just about hey, it produced great work product, or it produced work product that was insecure and got exploited, or it did something and dropped tables. Like there's the behavioral component as well. Like behaviors like drop tables is a great example of behavior. Like you have to be accountable for the operation of these things. And so I think that the role of the developer, changes in a way. Like the sort of sensibility and awareness of building systems that kind of scale, operate, et cetera, the wisdom associated with being able to kind of look forwards a few years and reason about, whether the system is going to, hold up, whether it's going to operate well in, kind of multi-AZ failures, or, like any of these kind of boundary conditions that maybe aren't necessarily part of the training corpus is, it will require human actors. But I also think that the way that we work has to change. Like a developer should no longer, and I have this conversation with my team all the time, which is like, congratulations, you're all managers. Like you always were like, most of the IC engineers I work with, like they don't want to be managers. They love writing code. Like they love the craft. They're sort of infatuated. They're very good at it. A lot of them, write code like fish swim. But at the end of the day, it's like, no, congratulations, you're now a manager. Like, and you know what the hardest thing about being a manager is that you create value through other people. And so you have to start reimagining yourself as a developer as more like a context engineer. And it's not just about, hey, I use this tool to create code. I can understand the code. I ship the code. It's I use this tool to create the best expression or the closest representation of production code that I can live with and take accountability of, and that I can close the cognitive gap on, because at the end of the day, I'm accountable for this work product. And so I do think that the deployment of, or the scale of AI deployment is really going to be gated by accountability. And I think the thing that teams are going to have to pay down is cognitive debt, awareness debt, situational awareness debt, because you can't be accountable for something you don't understand. And I think that's going to be true for quite a while.
So one more on that then. So if you're to hire a developer now, what do you hire under? What skills are you looking for?
I tend to hire a lot more senior today than I ever did, right? So, one of the things, like I heard the guy, the CEO of Cursor say this, it's a lot easier to make a great developer kind of AI aware than it is to make an AI aware developer a great developer. A great developer. There's the hard skills associated with kind of systems engineering and awareness is difficult to repeat. So there's kind of two buckets I look for here. One is hiring for kind of AI fluency and recognizing, and this is not just like, oh, hey, I fire up Claude Code and I use it to produce things. It's like, I understand the behavior of agentic systems. I understand the lawnmower problem. Like, lawnmowers are great, but you have to push them to do work. Like, I understand that you kind of have to take an eval-driven development rather than test-driven development. I understand intuitively that unit tests are no longer proof of correctness. I have strong awareness of the amount of work associated with kind of keeping these things on rail. Like, I'm conversant in the semantic coupling that occurs between tools and skills as you start to use these things and how things go off the rail. So that's one skill set that is at a premium, and I highly value and I bring into the organization, because it takes a certain amount of time to get up to speed on these technologies. And when you're scaling quickly, you can certainly develop those skills, but you need to have the seed crystal around which those skills can grow. And on the second side of the house is just, really robust engineering talent. So models hallucinate. They say dumb, crazy things all the time. Someone has to look at this and say, like, that doesn't make any sense. This is kind of a poor way to do it. So it's really the judgment that comes with experience. And I think the really hard thing, and I don't have an answer for this, and I don't know if you do, but it's like, how do you get to that level in this new world where most of the hiring is skewing more senior? Like, what's that sort of apprentice, journeyman, kind of master arc for engineers in a world where a lot of those earlier career activities that we used to rely on are being displaced by these kinds of systems? And I don't have the answer to that.
I don't have the answer to it either. I mean, I don't know. It's like, I don't know what the future is going to bring. I was talking with LinkedIn the other day, and they were talking about judging skills based on how well you use tools, actually. In other words, they've got something in place right now where if it's an AI tool, you can ask the AI tool. It sounds strange. Listen to this. You ask the AI tool, you say, hey, what am I good at? Then the AI tool will say, hey, well, you're good at vibe coding or something, and you've got a proficiency level of 1. You're able to do X, Y, and Z, and then you can use LinkedIn's API to throw that into LinkedIn and then outline your skill and your tools that's certified through their platform. Podcast listeners, Al Martin here. I am going to split this into part 1 and part 2 with Craig McLuckie. Look, he invented Kubernetes, and we're going to talk about that in the next episode. Also, we're going to talk about Stacklok, so don't miss it. See ya.